Hi, and welcome to the Effective Teaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dan, and we are going to be talking about being an effective teacher. Hey, welcome back. Today I'm going to be giving you 5 strategies to use questions that promote engagement and deeper understanding for your students. So the first thing I'm going to suggest that you do, the first strategy when you're using questions to help promote engagement or deeper understanding, right? So the first strategy is to stop asking for the right answers. Okay, so stop asking questions that are just, your basic, which energy system is dominant for this sport, or which, what's the right answer to this maths equation, or who wrote this, or when did this happen in history, or all those kinds of questions. You actually want to move away from that kind of question because that's very basic. That's not promoting engagement. That's not helping to deepen understanding. Instead, you want to ask questions that are seeking for the reasons why something is correct or incorrect. Okay, so this gives insight then for you into the reasoning for the student and whether or not they actually understand what's being talked about. Because there are ways that you can get right answers using the wrong methods. And there are ways where you can come up with a seemingly right answer even that's based on a completely poor understanding of the concept. And so, for example, you might ask students, rather than saying, is Romeo and Juliet a tragedy or a love story, right? Rather than asking them that, you want to say, why is Romeo and Juliet considered a tragedy and not just a love story? Okay, and so the students then are trying to give you reasons for why is Romeo and Juliet a tragedy, right? Why is it not just a love story? Because there is a love story to it, but it's more than that. It's a tragedy of a love story. And so you can ask questions like that where you're looking for the reasons behind the question. And so it's really simple way of just slight changes to the way you ask a question. It's simple structural changes where rather than asking, is this the right answer? So, is aerobic training the best training for soccer? Right? You can change that to saying, why is aerobic training not necessarily the best training for soccer? Right? And then they might go, oh, well, maybe it isn't, maybe it is. So they've got to go through and kind of justify what they've come up with. And it just forces them to, it shows you that they understand, right? It's showing you their reasoning behind the answer rather than just focusing on correct or incorrect. You're focusing on their process that's happening in the background, which furthers engagement and really helps the students to deepen their understanding because they have to be showing why or how all the time, not just the right answer. So that's number 1. Stop asking for the right answer. Instead, look for reasons why something is incorrect or correct or whatever in the background. Okay, so you're looking to understand students' reasoning and thought processes that they've got. The second strategy is, instead of using think, pair, share, which I'm not saying is bad, right? Think, pair, share has been around for a long time. Lots of people use it. I want to encourage you to instead use write, persuade, present, and question. And so the reason why I am going to suggest this is thinking happens in your head, and often we don't know if we've given students enough time. Often students will think and maybe forget about it, or often they just sit there in silence because you don't know if they're actually thinking. So getting them to write the answer down instead is forcing them to think. It's showing you evidence that they're thinking, and it gives them something to refer to whenever they then have to engage in any kind of conversation. Now the pair is still kind of there, but the pairing now is not just about getting together and chatting, it's about persuading. And so I've written the stuff down that's in relation to whatever question you've got, and then I'm going to sit with another person, so I'm pairing up, but instead of just chatting about it, my job is to persuade them why my answer is correct or better than their answer. And so they're going to sit down and they're actually going to try and understand each other's perspectives and then give arguments to each other about which one is best. And then they should decide out of that which one is best. And you can do that in pairs, you can do that in threes, you can do pairs and then into fours if you want to, doing this kind of persuasion process. And it just forces the students to think more about what they're doing. So they're thinking about the answer, they're writing their answers, they've got to then think, if they know persuade is coming, they're going to write down some reasons for that. and then they're going to bring that into that conversation that's had with the other student. So writing, persuading. The next thing is then to present. And so presenting here, I want them to stand up. I want at least a representative from the group to stand up and present what they came up with. So this is what we've decided is the best answer, and these are the reasons why. Okay, and they can kind of do that as a group. They can do that as an individual representing the group. I don't mind, but it's about presenting something and then the time being given then for others to ask questions about that. And so other people in the classroom go, well, why did you say this reason and not that? Is this a better thing that you could do instead of this one? And here's 3 reasons why I think that one's better. And it's not that they're going to have an argument, but it's about that opportunity to have questions that force them to defend. Okay, and it's forcing them to go deeper. Okay, it's not just thinking, having a chat, and then sharing it with the group. Okay, it's now writing something down, trying to persuade someone, presenting it to the group, right? Presenting it to the whole class, and then being questioned about what you present. So it forces them to have to go deeper. Right? They can't just be shallow on that, because they're going to get smashed when they get up and present something, and everyone's like, you've missed this, or what about that, or what about this, or what about this? And the students then go, oh, okay, I really didn't do this well. I didn't think this through properly. And by doing it in a process where it's going from an individual to a group, right, that should by the end be very strong what they present to the class. And you can have people do different questions then and bring that to the group. And that then gives this extra layer of depth and thinking to things, because they're then considering other, there could be slight tweaks on the question, or it can be completely different questions, but all relating to a similar context or a similar piece of content. So this is really forcing every student to engage, and it gives them a chance to consider reason and evidence throughout the process. And it's really important, I think, for doing that. And so an example of a question I might use for that is, what is the best way to train for 400 meters? So this is me being a PE teacher. That might be a question I might use. Why is this the best? And so they go, I think this is the best. And then they've got to come up with reasons why. They've got to argue with someone. And then they might actually find as a group that they change it, they tweak it, they refine it, and then they're going to present it to the larger class, who then might ask questions, why is it continuous training? Why are we having, short breaks in between? Why don't we have longer breaks in between? In 400 meters, they don't run one 400 meter race and then wait a minute and then run another one, right? They run one flat out, and then they have a break for days before they do the next one. So what do we really need to work on with that training? So you can go really deep with that. And you can do the same with lots of questions. So we could go back to that Romeo and Juliet question. You can have, all right, kids, I want you to talk about that. Write your own reasons for why, chat about it, present it, and then answer questions about it. That process can work for almost any question, as long as the question is not just what's the correct way of, what's 1 + 1? Like, that's not going to work. But if you can talk to them about, why is, 10 to the power of 3 equal, why is that not 300, right? And then have them go through and go, well, it's not 300 because it's 10 times 10 times 10. It's not 10 times 10 3 times. Like, it's not 3 times 10. 10 times 10 times 3, right? That's not the process. And so it forces them to show, their reasoning, their understanding, and it forces that further engagement by using write, persuade, present, and question rather than think, pair, share. The third strategy for using questions to promote engagement and deeper thinking is to build journaling into your lessons. So this is essentially building in reflection, right? So you want to scaffold the reflection process to focus on their growth in their learning, to focus on overcoming barriers, to focus on connecting new and old information explicitly, right? So if they go, well, ask them, what things did you learn this week? And they can write that down and go, okay, how does what you learned this week connect to what you learned a month ago? And they can flick back in their journal and look at what they've learned and go, oh yeah, it connects here and it connects there. And that helps them to actually cement their knowledge in their head. It helps them to reflect and see how they're progressing. It's really good for long-term learning, long-term memory. And then you can also embed in that journal questioning type stuff, some real-world applications. How might this be applied to your context or into, and you can be specific or a bit more general in that as you create this process. But it's just about helping our students to reflect, helping them to think about their learning explicitly. That whole metacognition processing, how does the new and old connect, is really, really powerful for our students when they're looking to cement that long-term memory, long-term memory. So when I do this, you might do this once a week or maybe once a fortnight, depending on how often you've got them. You want to give them about 20 minutes to do this. Don't give them 5 minutes. It's not enough time to really do this well. You want to give them plenty of time, a good solid block where they can do this and engage with it. You could scaffold these, or you could kind of leave it a bit more open if you want as they get older and get more used to it. But you could even use, there's a thing called the learning dispositions wheel, and it talks about different areas of learning. So your ability to use resources, to connect with people and hold each other accountable, to contribute to groups, to think critically about things, your ability to research and to find good pieces of information and that kind of stuff. They all fall into this kind of learning dispositions wheel. So you could embed some of that stuff too in there, have them reflect on those and identify ones that they're improving and which ones they're already doing well in, which ones they still need to improve later, that kind of stuff. But building that kind of journaling process into the learning that's happening in your classroom will help to promote the engagement of your students and deepen and cement that understanding that they've got. Okay, the fourth strategy is to expose assumptions. Okay, so have students explore and write down their assumptions in relation to open-ended questions. And so this here is just about getting to things behind how they're going to go about approaching something. So, if you're doing Shakespeare, students might have the assumption that Shakespeare is old and dead and hard to understand. And so that's their assumption. And then they need to think about how that might impact what they're doing as they engage with Shakespeare, and whether it be Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet, whatever it is. Right? We want to make sure that we're helping the students identify their assumptions as they try and analyze something, because it helps them to go deeper with their thinking, particularly around open-ended questions that are presented to them. So you can talk about the impact of Shakespeare, or you could look at anything in history even, and have the students think about what are their assumptions when they come to historical texts. When you look at the history of Egypt, are these hieroglyphs written on the wall? What are your assumptions about them? What are your assumptions about Egypt? Were they a great civilization? Were they not a great civilization? What about their culture, and how do you go about thinking about that? All kinds of things can come into that, and just getting their students to expose those assumptions. And that then will lead them to see how their assumptions impact the thinking and the answers they're coming up with. And so then you can then pair them up with someone who has a different set of assumptions, and that would help them both to gain a deeper understanding by looking at something from multiple perspectives. And so that multiple perspectives helps the students go deeper on the topic they're looking at, because they've identified their assumptions and the other person's assumptions, and their predispositions, I guess, for lots of things as well. So really helping our students to see their assumptions, right? To expose them, let them be open before they then go about the whole process. And particularly it would be good if they're going to do like a big research type process, right? They can identify what are their assumptions that they have going into this, and so think about analyzing a novel, right? If they've read the novel, they have read it from a particular perspective, okay? And they can write down some of their assumptions about some of the characters that are in there and that kind of stuff. And then they can talk to the other person who has different assumptions about those characters, and then interpret key events in the book and the storyline based on the perspectives of those different assumptions and how that's impacted the reading of the novel. And you can do that to lots of things. Okay, so as I was doing that, I actually already impacted on the fifth one, which is to pair students with different perspectives. Okay, so they can be real perspectives, or they can be made up kind of case study scenario based perspectives. So you could say that I want you to take the perspective of a young single mum who has a child, but that she's 20 and she's got 2 children under the age of 3. This person over here is 75 years old, all their children are grown up. This person over here is maybe they've got they're an immigrant who's come from another country, so you could pick any of the other countries really, but they're an immigrant who's arrived recently, and we're all going to talk about this particular scenario, and you can have them all get into this group where they're each presenting and arguing from the character that you've given them to kind of act out in that discussion, to force that deeper understanding by looking at different perspectives. Or you can just get real perspectives. So if you know that different kids have different perspectives on particular topics, sit them together and have them actually try and understand each other, because this is one of the key things in this process, is that they're not sitting there to argue, they're actually coming together so that they can understand each other's perspectives. And by understanding other people's perspectives, it should help them to actually get a deeper understanding of whatever it is that's being discussed. And so they can then look at how it impacts their own application of the content. It can really open their eyes to the fact that their kind of assumptions and stuff are impacting what they're looking at and how they're interpreting things. Okay, so that's 5. I am going to give you 6 though. I did say I was going to give you 5, but I've got a 6th one that I want to mention, and that is to ask why 5 times. Okay, so one of the things that happens is that students, and even us, when we ask why, we kind of go one level deep. We go, okay, here's the answer. This is my why. But if you actually keep asking why, so why is that your why? Why is that? Why is that? It forces that deeper, right? Really diving in deeper for how things work, or diving deeper for why things are important, and forces that greater level of justification around things, the better ability to evaluate and critique. So it helps students to get to the root causes of concepts, to the roots of topics or events that have happened. Why was the assassination of this person so pivotal in maybe starting World War I or something, and so they could then look into that and then go, well, why? And so they can look into the further and further into the background of what's going on. And that really forces them to go deeper with everything. Okay, so I've given you lots of strategies there. So it was meant to be 5 strategies to help with your questioning, to engage students, to help them to go deeper. I've given you 6. So they were, to look at the reasons, right? So asking questions now to find the reason behind the answer that the students are coming up with. You want to help students to write things, persuade people, present and question instead of think, pair, share. So write, persuade, present, question. Want to start getting our students to maybe do some journaling in response to some questions, reflecting on things. Help them to identify assumptions in relation to the questions that get asked. Help them to see a question from multiple perspectives, and then asking why 5 times. And all those things will help your students to go deeper. It will help your students to engage more in the learning that's happening, and hopefully improve their overall learning in your classroom. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit subscribe. Come to teacherspd.net and you can click a button and subscribe and get emails as well around this kind of stuff. I would love to help you to continue to become an effective teacher.